Eric Merda, a 43-year-old dad of 7, felt like fate was playing a game with him. This guy had seen his share of tough times, fighting off addiction, getting caught up in street fights, and running into trouble with the law. But lately, he'd been seeing things more clearly. He'd come to terms with the breakup with the mom of 5 of his kids, and had started to realize he needed better friends. Eric was smart, creative, and spiritually minded, and something in the universe was telling him it was time for a change. These days, Eric's life was more of a solo adventure. By day, he braved the Florida heat, fixing sprinkler systems in Bradenton. But at night, he'd seek out the ocean at Siesta Key Beach. Without a partner or kids waiting for him, he'd challenge himself with questions about existence and purpose. Sometimes under the stars at Siesta Key, surrounded by the mess people left behind, something would stir inside him. He'd feel this powerful urge to clean up, to make things right. This newfound passion for picking up trash wasn't just about keeping the beach clean anymore. On Monday, July 18, 2022, his job took him to a secluded part of Manatee County. As the day wound down, his curiosity got the best of him, and he followed a dirt path to Lake Manatee Fish Camp. He strolled past a small shop and locals playing horseshoes until he reached the lake. It was a beautiful spot, about 4 square miles of water bordered by wild swampland. But the litter spoiling the scene got to him. Without a second thought, he started cleaning up. But soon Eric's feet were getting itchy, and the call of the wild was too tempting to ignore. He left the litter behind and set off like an excited kid into the embrace of the woods. Before he knew it, he was in the thick of it, bushwhacking through a jungle of thorns and thickets. After what felt like forever, he stumbled out, scratched up and wiped out, into a grove of spindly orange trees, way off course and lost. He spent the next few hours stumbling around the endless orange grove, looking for a way out. When he hit a soggy, marshy patch, things got even tougher. By the time the sun started to set, Eric was in the thick of a brutal battle with the swamp. He tried using the sun to guide him, but nature was full of tricks, and every step seemed to lead him deeper into trouble. As the day slipped away, the seriousness of his situation really started to sink in. Night fell, and Eric found himself at the edge of Lake Manatee. Across the water, he could see the boat launch, deserted and quiet, and the silhouette of the highway bridge. It seemed so close, but was way too far for comfort. He was bone-tired, but going back through the swamp. That was a gamble with fate he wasn't willing to take. The lake was his only way out. The moment he started swimming, he felt an icy chill from the deep water. He was determined to reach the other side, and the coolness was a welcome relief for his dry throat. But before long, his heavy work clothes felt like they weighed a ton. Without hesitating, he let them sink into the dark water below. But his troubles were far from over. The lake seemed to have a mind of its own, pulling him off track, making each stroke harder than the last. It wasn't just a fight against the water. It was a fight against the urge to give up. Even as the night got darker and the stars above were just faint lights, Eric kept pushing through the pain, stroke by stroke. Then, his breath caught in his throat as he spotted it. A colossal alligator, lurking ominously in the water beside him. In a heart-pounding instant, his deepest fears materialized. The alligator struck, clamping its jaws around his arm with a crushing force, intent on dragging him into the depths below. With pure survival instinct, Eric fought back, wrestling with the alligator as it tried to drag him down into a deadly roll, not just once, but 3 times. He kicked and thrashed, gasping for air, resisting the gator's every attempt to take him under. It was a fight for his life, right there in the quiet darkness of Lake Manatee. And then, the world seemed to lighten, giving a false promise of reprieve before the alligator executed its notorious death roll. The darkness returned with a vengeance as Eric felt an excruciating tear, his right arm being severed between shoulder and elbow. The gator, seemingly satisfied with its grisly trophy, slipped away into the depths, leaving a stunned Eric to grapple with the surreal calm that followed. Somehow the shock numbed the pain that should have been too much to bear. The jagged end of his arm was a grim reminder of the nightmare. He used what was left of his strength to drag himself to the water's edge with his good arm. The panic that had been bubbling inside him started to fade as exhaustion took over, and he passed out, hidden in the sawgrass. When he woke up, he realized that by some miracle, he wasn't bleeding anymore. Under the shadow of a large tree, he felt a touch safer, and his shouts for help cut through the still air. In the silence that followed, Eric knew he was on his own, just as he had always been. Resigned, he settled by the tree to wait for dawn. And when pain finally did flood in, it was relentless. The next morning he saw two planes, but they didn't see him. There he was, naked and wounded with no way to signal, just another part of the wilderness. Driven by sheer will, he set out again, trying to follow the lake back to people. But nature wasn't done testing him. Underwater traps, thick underbrush, and then a new jolt of pain as a stick jabbed into the raw muscle of his missing arm. And through it all, he felt the eyes of the alligator, watching and waiting. As night began to fall again, luck, or something like it, found him. A concrete structure left over from who knows when seemed to offer a safe spot. He climbed onto it, and despite the danger, exhaustion won out, and he fell into a restless sleep. Waking up with his remaining arm dangling over the water was a harsh reminder. He had to get out of there. Before all this, Eric's ideas about life and death had been pretty hazy. But out there, with the swamp closing in, he felt like he heard a voice, a divine nudge, telling him to choose, live or die, but know it's going to be a rough ride. Eric's take on God was different from most. He believed that the divine was in everyone. To doubt that was to doubt himself. In that moment, he realized he had to stop fighting himself. Through an endless, grueling night, Eric trudged on, the tall grass hiding the swamp's murky waters beneath. As the sun rose on the third day of his ordeal, it lit up the swamp with a muggy glow, and green horseflies drawn to his wound buzzed incessantly. His energy was fading, his body battered and weakened, yet he clung to the promise he'd made to himself. He would survive. The hope for solid ground grew into an obsession. When he finally reached it, it felt almost like a cruel joke. A wall of thorny brush stood in his way. No going back, he figured. In fleeting breaks of relief, he braved the pain and pushed through the thorns. Then a glimmer of hope, an old beer bottle half buried in the mud. It was a sign. Civilization was near. He could almost taste the end of this nightmare. With every painful step, he was inching closer to home. And there it was, a road, his finish line. On the other side of a wire fence stood a man, his eyes wide at the sight of Eric. "An alligator got me. Water, please." Eric's voice was hoarse with desperation. The hospital in Sarasota became Eric's world for the following month. Complications from his swamp injuries led to more of his arm being amputated, but miraculously, he hadn't lost too much blood. During recovery, his hunger was fierce, and with a touch of dark humor, he found himself craving for alligator meat. Back in the real world, Eric faced his new reality. His old job was no longer an option, but he didn't let that stop him. He thought about writing, sharing his story through public speaking. His mission was clear: to inspire others with his story. If he could outswim an alligator and outlast a swamp, who's to say what anyone else could overcome? Sure, his future was filled with unknowns, but then again, that's what his journey had always been about. Doubts occasionally crept in, making his dreams seem far-fetched. But in his quieter moments, Eric would think to himself, surviving that swamp seemed impossible too, but here I am. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to check out the other great content on our channel. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more. Thank you again, and see you in the next video.